As the spring season approaches, many people prepare to thoroughly clean their homes. The idea of cleaning can be stressful or therapeutic depending on the person. For Natalie Schrier, it's become a business known as Cut the Clutter. The president and founder of the organization joins me to discuss methods to help you achieve a cleaner and more organized home. Natalie, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Now, can you just tell me, what inspired you to get into the field of helping people organize their homes and their spaces?
Sure. I mean, it's something that has always come naturally to me. In 2008, I needed a job and was wanting to start my own business, wondering what I could do that would bring me joy and what was I good at. And I used to do this as a hobby with my friends, especially my best friend. And I started Googling, I just want to clean out people's closets for a living. And I found the National Association of Productivity and Organizing Professionals. And I was like, holy cow, there's an industry for this. Mm-hmm. And then I just took it from there.
Now, can you tell us more about the organization Cut the Clutter?
Sure. We've been in business, meaning me, since 2008. I service the greater New York City area. It's just me. I'm a one-woman show. I go in, I help people get rid of things that they don't need and find homes for the things that they want to keep, and so that they can access everything in a logical and intuitive fashion and keep it maintained going forward.
Now, I think that's super helpful because for many people, just organizing and cleaning their home can be overwhelming. It could be stressful, and it could actually make it difficult to even start or to know where to begin. How do you overcome this in your work?
Well, first, I want to say that overwhelming is the number one adjective that people use to describe that they're overwhelmed when I meet them for an initial consultation. People don't know where to start. There's so much clutter everywhere, and they don't know how to take that first step. So the way that I help people is we break things into categories. Sorting and purging is always the first step of organizing. You make sure that you have all of your like items together so that you can make purging decisions based on comprehensive categories. And then once you've purged and you know what you're keeping and what you're trying to store, then is the time that you go to the container store and you buy bins. Only then. You don't do that at the beginning because you don't actually know what you're trying to store and where you're going to put it.
That's a really good tip, actually, because I found myself saying, like, I need to organize, so let me go to Target and just get a bunch of stuff.
There's so many times that I get to a client's home and they already have a bunch of bins because they thought that buying this stuff was going to solve their clutter problems, right. And that's not how it works.
Right. I can imagine it probably makes it harder now because now you have bins in your home that you're probably not even going to use.
They're sitting in the corner somewhere.
Right. Now, could you just tell us a little bit, what do you say to people, even though you have this great advice, what do you say to help them or motivate them to just say okay, let's just start this?
Well, they've already made the decision to get started by having me in their home, right? So it's just a willing of how cooperative they're going to be with the process. It's challenging for people to purge a lot of times for a variety of reasons. Somebody might be super sentimental. Some people want to make sure that whatever they're getting rid of is going to go to the right place, be it recycling or a good home. Some people don't like to feel wasteful. So it's really, I ask a lot of questions when I'm working with someone to get to the root of why they feel like they're trying to hold on to something. And then I work with them from there based on what their hang up is.
That's a really interesting point because I find myself I don't want to be wasteful or, I'll say maybe I could donate it to somebody, but then it never goes anywhere and it just stays in their home. Would you say that's a reason why people struggle to just clear their homes? It's not about being messy, but there's so many underlying issues or reasons why they start.
It's interesting. In New York City, it's so easy for us to get things, but New York City doesn't make it very easy for us to get rid of things. Electronics recycling is hard to come by. It's really hard to donate toys. There's just a variety of reasons where people who live in walk-ups, they just feel like they can't carry the stuff out of their homes on their own. Right. It's just people feel paralyzed by the thought of actually the physical activity of getting it out of their house and making sure that it goes to a place that they're comfortable with.
And I'm really glad that you brought up NYC because I can imagine it's a unique experience for people who live in New York City who have really small spaces and probably have a lot of stuff. What have you found in your experience working with people who probably live in New York City?
We don't have enough space for the most part. Space is at a premium, and that's why it's super important, especially for New York City residents, but for everybody, to not keep more in your home than you actually need. There is this mentality for a lot of people what if I need it one day? And in today's world, what I say to them is we just went through a global pandemic. If you didn't need it before COVID and you didn't need it during COVID, you probably don't need it.
Right. Now, as I mentioned, spring cleaning, or spring is around the corner. And so that kind of motivates a lot of people to begin spring cleaning. What are some of the methods that people can use to help clear clutter that they have accumulated over the year?
It's basically goes back to the basic principle that I referenced before, which is sort things into categories, purge what you don't need, and decide what you need to keep. And spring cleaning, there's always an emphasis on it as a good time of year to get it done. But if you're practicing good habits throughout the year, you don't need to spring clean. You'll just be organized always.
Right. Now, I also want to bring up the fact that I read that you started kind of being into this at a really young age, which I think is kind of cool. Can you just expand on that a little bit more?
Sure. I actually grew up in a really disorganized household. And so I got stressed out by that as a child. So the only place that I found solace was in my bedroom, where I was in control of keeping things tidy and organizing my stuffed animals and Barbie dolls and whatnot. And I would say to that point, a lot of parents feel like they can't get their kids involved in organizing. Kids like to be helpers, and a lot of kids like to feel like they know where their stuff is. So please welcome your children into the process of organizing when it comes to putting away their toys.
And, what advice would you have to parents who have kids who are a little bit more on the messier side, or they struggle with, tidying up or organizing their rooms?
I think the less is more in that situation. Every toy that your child owns doesn't need to be out in the open. That's why kids have a problem focusing on one thing to play with at a time. They just move on very quickly. So limiting the amount of things that your kid has access to gives them, number one, the opportunity to focus on what to play with, and number two, not too many choices of where to throw things back.
Now, I really want to bring up, before this interview, we kind of had a brief moment to talk a little bit. And we talked about some of the shows that, I like to watch, but they prioritize aesthetics over actually being, I guess, functional, or actually being organized. Can you talk about the importance of that? Because I know on social media, there is this kind of rise of these things that just look nice to look at.
Right.
But, is that hard to keep up? Can you just explain or expand on that a little bit more?
Sure. There are certain companies, like we were talking about, the Home Edit, who do put an emphasis on the aesthetics and making things rainbow colored and stacking nicely. That's not necessarily realistic for maintenance in some circumstances. For example, children's playrooms. You can't stack bins on top of each other of toys because the kids are not going to be able to access that stuff on their own, especially if they're small children. So there needs to be a good balance of making things look tidy, but also making them functional so that the person using the items can access them easily.
And have you found, I guess, just being on social media and seeing other people who say oh, here are some tips to, stay organized. So, what are your thoughts on that as well?
I think that organizing, there are a few basic principles, like the sorting into categories, like items together. But organizing is really a custom tailored situation based on, again, what's going on in their head and making them hold on to things. So you really need to custom tailor your approach to each client.
Now, you talked about, kind of being a part of a household that wasn't always organized and how that, could sometimes stress you out. I really want to take a moment to talk about mental health when it comes to, I guess, being tidy, organized, or I don't want to say clean, because I don't want people to think it's, dirty or anything like that. But of course, when you have mental health challenges, it could make taking this step a little bit harder. Can you just explain or expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, it depends on the severity of the clutter issue at home. If we're talking about a hoarding situation, for example, hoarding is a mental illness, unfortunately. And there are hoarders, who will work with a professional organizer thinking that it's going to solve all their problems. But unless a person is concurrently working with a mental health professional to drill down to the root of the problem of why they're saving things and why they're living the way that they're living, working with a professional organizer is really just putting a Band-Aid on the problem. You really need to get professional help and figure out what's going on up here so that you can tidy your home for the long run.
And I guess in the opposite, how could having, a room that isn't as organized, or let's say it was really organized, but then slowly over time, you kind of break into those old habits. How can that affect your mental health?
It can be a little debilitating for people. There's a fair amount of shame that comes with having clutter in your home, and there's a fair amount of people feeling like a failure, unfortunately, if what you're referring to happens, the systems break down. But the way to counteract that is to not let it break down, which I know sounds easier said than done. But instead of just, putting the clutter problem at bay and then dealing with it once a year for spring cleaning,
Right.
taking 10 minutes at the end of the day to make sure that things are put away so that it doesn't pile up, it makes it a lot more manageable for people and then a lot healthier up here for people.
And then can you just talk about, I guess, kind of getting into that habit? Because I know for me, I really try, to be an organized person.
Sure.
And then like just over time, things just like kind of go back to normal. How do you break that habit?
So it depends what we're talking about, right? Because being messy and being disorganized are not necessarily the same thing.
Okay.
And I'm going to give you a little secret here. When I come home at night, I kick off my shoes in the hallway. I don't necessarily hang up my coat. My apartment doesn't look like a museum all the time.
Yeah.
And that's okay because it's lived in. We have lives. We can't just keep on top of things all of the time. But if a neighbor called and was like, hey, can I pop in for 5 minutes? I could clean up in 2 seconds without shoving things in random drawers because everything has a home. And that's the definition of being organized.
Now, what advice would you give to somebody who's just struggling to kind of live in a more organized, cleaner space? What advice would you give them to actually start or to begin thinking about some of the changes that they need to make?
Take a first step, and that could be calling a professional organizer. That could be tackling a junk drawer in your home or the bathroom medicine cabinet, or going through your sock collection and getting rid of all of the orphans that you've been holding on to for the last 3 years, thinking they're miraculously going to show up again. Take that one little step, and you'll find that it's not that scary if you do it a little at a time.
Well, Natalie, I want to thank you so much for joining us and kind of giving everybody some tips that we could all use.
Yes, I hope it is helpful.
If you'd like to have Cut the Clutter help you organize your house, please go to their website at www.cut-the-clutter.com. We have to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with more open right after this.